What's up everyone, this is AJ from alphapixel.net, today bringing you an exciting tutorial. Today we are going to be creating a Tetris style setup and animation in Cinema 4D using its native tools, and it's surprisingly easier than you'd think. We are definitely not going to be creating each individual brick and animating each individual brick or coloring each individual brick. It is, for the most part, fully automated, and without further ado, let's jump right in. So the first thing we need is a plane, or really just a polygon object, preferably flat, so the plane works just fine. Let's set it up vertically so it's pointing in the Z. Now the first thing to note is that you do want square polygons. If you want a different setup, if you want to make it wider or taller, anything like that, just make sure you increase your segments to make them square. But for this tutorial, the default plane actually works just perfectly. So let's go ahead, and the first thing we need is to drop the explosion effects into the plane object. And right away you'll see we already have a great start to getting our brick shape. Now they're not quite what we're looking for, and we will tweak that and a few of the other settings inside the explosion effects. Going to the object, we have the time property. That's fine for now. We do need to bring the strength and a few of the other settings to 0 because we actually don't want to do any exploding, at least in this tutorial, of the bricks. We just want, all we want to utilize the explosion effects for is cutting out these brick shapes for us. So we need to set the strength to 0, we need to set the gravity to 0. Actually, sorry, it's gravity to 0, strength has to actually be 1. And you can kind of see the brick separation a little bit there, but if we make the strength 0, it disappears. So we need a strength of 1 to at least have it cut out those bricks. And they are a little hard to see, so if you go up to the plane object and in their Fong tag there, increase that, and there you can actually now see the actual brick shapes that it's creating. And you'll also see in the corners we have some very smooth shaded larger bricks, and that's because the explosion effects is not covering the entire object. We need to, you can see the handles and the gizmo here, we just need to drag those out beyond the bounds of the object. It's kind of cool though, if we bring it in it's completely flat, and then we can increase our brick shape there. It's kind of cool. So now that we have our bricks, we just need to actually look at, there's a little bit of separation there. We actually need to bring, let's see, is it the blast time? Yeah, set the blast time to 1 maybe? Yeah, and that will kind of bring everything in. If we set it to 0, it does that again. So that's why we need to just bring it to 1. And now we're good. All right, so if we bring over a shot of what Tetris looks like here, I'm sure you all remember, each brick is made out of 4 little square bricks. So every one of them is a 4 brick setup. We have the L, we have the line, we have the T, the Z, and the square. All 4 bricks. So if we go into the clusters tab, first we can start a thickness there. That's where we get the plane thickness from. We can make it perfectly square by setting the thickness to 20 centimeters. And the only other thing we need to adjust here is the min-max polys, which will give us our brick shape. So it's asking us how many basically polygons we want connected to each other to form the bricks. So if we go 4 and 4 and force it into that 4 setup, we get Tetris bricks. That's kind of awesome. It just kind of automatically makes Tetris for us. And didn't have to do any of that by hand. The only downfall is that some of the bricks, like this one, just a 1 brick, and then we got a 2 brick, and that's really only on that top row for the most part. I guess they are kind of scattered out a little bit, but I'd say 95% of the bricks are what we want, and I think it's totally fine to me anyway that a few of them are single little squares. I'm sure you could do something to this to modify that and make them all perfect, but for this relatively quick setup, and it's pretty automated and easy, so let's continue on. What we need to do to get access to those individual bricks is drop this thing into a fracture object. And I have all my deformers and everything on the cloners and all that, Mograph objects on the side here. So I'm going to click fracture object, drop that into the fracture object, and now we have access to each of these bricks as if they were clones. The first thing we actually need to do is go into object mode here. Right now it's set to straight, which it treats the entire piece as one clone. If we go to explode segments, we can now access each brick as its own clone. And we can do that by using effectors just as we would a regular cloner. So if I go and grab the plane effector, you'll see it jumped up there. And if we increase the parameter, if we grab the fall off and go to linear and just rotate that vertically, you'll see we get something happening. It's not exactly what we want. We actually need to go to the plane effector and invert that fall off. And there we go. Look at that. Individual bricks falling perfectly into position. No real work done to do this. But it's not over yet. There's still some things we need to do to definitely make this look a lot better. So, first thing is, you'll notice is, let me just increase the Y here a little bit. They're all falling pretty uniformly and very mechanically, and also you'll notice that some of these intersect, which we will fix here in a little bit. First, let's fix the uniformity issue. And for that, we're actually going to turn off the plane effector. We're going to select the fracture object, and we're going to add in the shader effector. And we're basically going to set it up exactly how we did with the plane effector, but we can take advantage of the shading tab to create an offset. So in the linear, we will grab, and we have to rotate it 90, and go back and invert the fall off there, and then just increase the Y. So we're back to where we were with the linear effector. The plane effector. Oh, viruses, great. Go away. All right. All right, so now we can take advantage of the shading tab in the shader effector. So if we add in a noise, here, actually let me bring this up a little more here. Or actually, sorry, bring the parameter down so you see that this will illustrate it a little easier. All right, if we go into the shading tab and add in the noise, everything kind of becomes a little more random. If we jump into the noise shader here, you'll see that we have access to the global scale, and if we increase that, they're all going to kind of still fall somewhat uniformly. So we actually want to decrease that all the way down so we get more individual randomness. And you can even emphasize that in the random relative scale here in the Y. You can turn that down as well. That will just make things a little bit more random. And you can use the contrast to also tweak things a little bit. Let's see. Just note that if you do tweak the contrast a little too much, you'll get a lot more intersecting. So you kind of, you want some randomness, but not too much. Let's see. Let's increase the Y a lot more so that we don't get all that intersecting. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so not too many of them intersect. There's one that does. So there's a couple that do, and again, we will fix that here in a minute. So, all right, we've got a little bit of randomness added, and the next thing we want to do is color the clones. Let me just really quick want to set a keyframe on this so I don't have to keep dragging that. I can just scrub in the timeline. So set a keyframe there, and at 90, we'll drag it all the way up. Another keyframe. Perfect. So coloring the clones, we need to create actually, first we need to utilize one more effector, and that is the random effector. And let me bring this all back here. We go ahead and select our fracture object and add in a random effector. This is not for the position or anything like that. We just want to randomize the color. Awesome. Looks pretty good already, if those are the colors you want. But if you don't and you want to use your own colors, we need to create a shader and utilize the Mograph color shader. So in our shader, in the color channel, we are going to add in, go down to Mograph color shader, and it's just white. If we go into the shader, there's only two options, color and index ratio. It is actually looking at each individual clone, but we need to add in one more effect to really get that to read in our own colors, and that is the colorizer. So if we go in and drop a colorizer on top of that, oh, nothing happened because we haven't applied it yet. If we go and apply our shader to our fracture object, now, you'll see it changed red and black. And over here we have yellow. Why is that? Well, inside the colorizer we have a gradient. You'll see it's reading from the gradient, although we're not getting our yellow because it's set to luminance. We need to set it to hue, and then we get it reading from the entire gradient, which is really cool because then we can kind of drag and interactively see what we're getting as far as clone color. But one thing to note, one gotcha here, is that the actual render is different than the viewport display, which is really annoying. You'll see these bricks up here, like they're shaded black, but in the render, a couple of them are yellow. Very annoying. What we can do is add in the interactive rendered region, and you can even set it to low just to keep an eye on your colors, just to make sure they're right. So in the gradient, we can now drop down the gradient and add our own colors. And you can load a preset. Cinema comes built in with like a ton of gradient presets, which is awesome. We can add in that color scheme, and that looks pretty cool. But I have already actually set up a gradient preset with the Tetris colors. You'll see that they're probably a little more saturated, but of course you can tweak them however you want. This gradient will be available in the scene file along with everything else that we're doing here, so you don't have to go do it by hand if these are the colors that you want. And you'll see too, by just sliding a few of these around, you'll change a few individual bricks. If you're feeling like maybe it's too much blue over here, tricky part is you don't know exactly where it's picking from for each clone, so you're gonna kind of have to, it's a little bit of guesswork, but it's weird, I can't find the blue that's tweaking the side here. Oh, there we go. It's clearly that one. Yeah, there we go. That made it a little bit more random. Now we got a little bit too much red. All right, so that's why I made a bunch of these, is that it just makes it a little bit more random. So, okay, we've got our color. Let's move on. Just know that in the viewport it will look more blue, even though it's a lot more random in the real render. So you guys just listened to my idiot self talk about how to color these bricks, and after I got done with the tutorial, I actually found out a better way to color them, and a way that makes a little bit more sense than using the random effector to color the clones. So what I found out was that instead of using the random effector in your fracture object to randomly color your brick objects, we can actually use the shader effector. So if we grab our fracture object and click the shader effector, we'll turn off any effects, and in the shading tab we'll select a gradient. And now what that'll let us do is, when we drag our object that we already had made with the color, and it's got the colorizer and the color shader that we had, I put it back to a standard gradient just to illustrate this to you guys. If we drop that back on the fracture object, also in the shader we have to, in the effect parameter, turn off the use alpha strength, and now you'll see what we had lined up with our in our material lines up perfectly with what we have on our brick objects. So, and then you can interactively drag, and now it makes a little bit more sense as to how it's coloring the brick objects, and it's using this gradient and it's tying it into the gradient in the shader object here, which is something I did not know before. So it's going from black to white. So black here equals blue, and the white side equals the red, and these equal the grays in between. So we can actually tweak things there. We can slide things over here. We can put on some turbulence to add some randomness. And you know, you don't have to stick to the standard U and the V. You could do all kinds of crazy variations, but just know that whatever is white in the gradient will be on the left, and whatever's black will be on the right. So pretty useful, and I just thought I should update you guys on that. But the rest of the tutorial will continue on with the color that we came up with before. So we have our animation here, looking pretty good. Now the next thing we need to do to level this thing up is add in some bevel, and that is easy enough with the bevel deformer. This will really plus the whole setup. We just add that in. If we add it in before the explosion, we get kind of a crazy look. Let's add it in after the explosion. There we go. That's the look we want. And that makes your bricks a lot more visible. Although the one thing you'll notice right away is that they're kind of like bubbly looking, which might be the look you're after. But if you want them more geometric, all you got to do is go into your Fong tag and basically turn it off. And now you get a perfectly flat brick with a bevel. And I just want to increase that bevel to make this more apparent. So we'll increase it to 3 centimeters. Now we have a nice geometric look to our bricks. And you can play around with the component mode here. Instead of edges, you could switch it over to polygons for a different look. And you'll see it kind of extrudes on all sides, or bevels on all sides, I should say. But let me just try, yep, you can actually utilize the caps. So if we add it, if we go into the selection and type C1, that means cap 1. And you can do cap 2 if you just want the back. It's kind of a little hidden thing in cinema that C1 always stands for cap 1, C2 always cap 2, and I believe there's R1 and R2 for rounding, if there's any kind of rounding going on. But, so yeah, you can mess with that, but we're actually going to turn that off for now and go back to edge mode, because I like the look of that better for this. And that looks pretty sweet. So I think just 2 more things we need to tweak here. One is they're still falling pretty fast and just kind of slamming down, which I suppose they would, but just for this animation, I want them to fall just a little bit nicer. And if we go into our shader effector, into the fall off tab, so the spline is default linear, which goes like this, and I don't know why by default it doesn't show up, but if you just right click it and go to reset, it will pop up. So if we change the shape of the spline, this controls how it eases in and out. If we right click and go down to spline presets and go to square, now you'll see they kind of jumped down a little bit. Now they're really easing their way in and not just slamming down at the bottom so hard, which might be the look you're going for, but I kind of wanted them to ease their way in a little bit. The thing it does do, I think, is it creates a few more intersections on the bricks, but that leads us perfectly into the next section where we are going to, the next and last section where we're going to fix that. And it looks like the two L's here are in that Z are intersecting, but that kind of looks like it. I've noticed that for the most part they don't intersect, but it kind of seems like mostly that first row for the most part. And I was racking my brain over how to do this the easiest way, how to get these bricks to not intersect and, have more control over each one. And I really couldn't find a good way without really digging in manually and doing it. So what I did was I made a little tool with Espresso. It's a pretty simple setup, but it lets you get individual access of the clone weighting for the effector on each individual clone. And I will show you that right now. So I just have it sitting over here in the scene file. I'm going to grab it and I'm going to copy it over. So MG weight override, Mograph weight override, and it's just got some pretty simple user data. You input your Mograph object, you grab your Mograph weight map tag, and here we have the clones that we can affect. Now they're all set to -1, and that is because we need to input a clone number. And your next question is, you're probably wondering, is how do I know the clone number? Well, if you go into your fracture object, into the transform tab, in display, you can go to index, and it will pop up with a little number on each individual brick. And you can see now the clone number. So the first one we want to mess with is this number 24, which needs to land before 25. So we would go, well, let's, I guess, go right into it here. The reason it's set to -1 is because there isn't a clone number -1. There is a 0, so we couldn't have it 0. So they're all set to -1, so essentially nothing's being selected. And there's only 10 currently, but you could look at the setup and duplicate it super easily if you needed more. And just to show you quick the setup, it's really nothing. The core of it's really coming from this Python node, which it has some super basic code in it, which I'll have available in the scene file for you guys to look at and pick apart, but there's really nothing to pick apart because it's really only a couple of lines of code. It's just mostly keeping the Espresso setup super clean so I don't have to make a million nodes. All right, so like I said, input our Mograph object, which is our fracture object, and then we need a Mograph weight map tag. So if we right click on the fracture object, we can go down to Mograph tags, Mograph weight map, and grab our tool again and input that weight map. And the next thing we have to make sure we do is in the shader effector, we have to drop that weight map in as well into the selection tab. Everything jumps, but when you click again, it goes back. So now it's all set up. So we just need to see when we need our objects weighted differently. And if we go in and we can play around with it and just kind of interactively see. So if we type in clone 24, you'll see that that clone jumped to the bottom, and it's set to 0 weighting, which means it's not affected at all by that effector. So we can play around with the weighting on that, and we can bring it back up. So I need it to start, I don't know, somewhere around, looks like, oh, let's bring it down a little bit so I can see it here. Probably, yeah, let's have it start around weight 66 there. That's fine. I'm actually going to drag that keyframe back. And then we need it to land before that Z, so we need to see where the Z lands. So we need it to land before frame 26 somewhere. So maybe frame 22 we can have it land and have it be 0 weight. Oh, comes in a little quick, so we can actually drag that keyframe out. There. Looks pretty good. We can actually have it drop even a little sooner maybe. There we go. Now it doesn't intersect anymore. And really quick, I'll fix this these two Z's that are intersecting here. So clone 25, or instead of modifying clone 25, we really could slow down clone 26, and that might be better because it'll give it more time. But we do need to make sure it comes in before 28. So let's grab 25. Whoops, 6. It's kind of nice. You can just interactively select the index number there. So let's set the weight back to normal. And actually, we do need to modify 25 because we can't make 26 go up. It really lets you go, in this setup, modify it going down. So we can move down, but going back up is a little trickier with this setup. So we need to just modify the clone down slightly. And wow, that was pretty easy. By the time it reaches the visible frame, it's not intersecting anymore, and you could definitely play around with that keyframe. There we go. Perfect. And you could do the same setup for 31, but you get the idea. Just go into the tool here and set your clone number and adjust the weighting, keyframe the weighting as you need to drop it. Make sure it drops on time so it's not intersecting. And again, that tool will be available in the scene file for you to take a look at. And really, you could use it for, I'm sure, a lot of things, not just this Tetris setup, but being able to override the weighting of certain effectors kind of interactively like that could be super useful. So feel free to take that and play with that. All right, well, that is the core setup of how you would go about making a Tetris-style setup and animation in Cinema 4D. If you guys come up with any great ways to enhance what I have here, maybe you found a better way to take care of the intersection problem, or a better way to randomize the clones even more than I have here, where you don't maybe get these little chunks of red here, definitely drop a comment on the blog about it. Also, feel free to share any cool setups you create with this. This is definitely just a starting point. You guys could easily plus this into a super cool setup, and I would love to see what you come up with. I hope this helped you guys. If nothing else, think of creative ways to use different deformers and effectors. It's kind of surprising when you play around with things, what you can accomplish in a very minimal amount of time. Like, we didn't have to create these little bricks by hand. We didn't have to color them by hand. We didn't have to do any of that. It was pretty much automated, and we got, I'd say, 90% of the way there. There's just a few things that if you wanted a true, Tetris setup that you would have to modify, but all in all, I think pretty rad. So thanks everybody for tuning in. If you like this tutorial, check back soon. We have more exciting tutorials planned for the next couple weeks. But that is it for now. This is AJ for alphapixel.net, and we will see you guys in the next tutorial.